Jason Clemmons, Doctor of Chiropractic at the Rock Health and Wellness Center in Lubbock, Texas, and this is Life with Jason Clemmons, DC. We are coming to you live from the Rock Health and Wellness Center studios in Lubbock, and we are live on the radio at 98.7 Walk by Faith and 1420 AM Lubbock Christian Nation. Hope you guys have had a fantastic day. Hope everything is going your way. At least I hope half of it's going your way. And I want to break down exactly why I say that tonight, because this week I am talking about doctors who influence me. And tonight's going to be a special night because we've got two of the originals that started right from the very beginning influencing me. One of them is my brother-in-law, Dr. Rick Housewright. And another one is one of the guys that he introduced me to, that his name is Dr. John DeMartini. And I'm just I'm going to share some stuff with you tonight that it's like, man, the first time I heard it, it was just mind blowing. It was so different. It was so different than the way that I was raised, so different than what I like knew about from the very beginning. And it took me repetition in time, just like learning how to throw a football or a baseball or anything else, learning how to do our spelling words. Remember how we used to do that back in the day? We did our spelling words, you just repetition in time, do them again. Get your list on Monday, see if you can get ready for that pre-test by Wednesday. If you make 100, you don't have to take your spelling test on Friday. Remember how that used to go when we were in second, third, fourth grade? Repetition in time. That's what it's all about. So I've talked about both of these guys in the past. I know I've done a show specifically about Dr. DeMartini in the past. Some of you new guys that are listening to the show, you might not have ever heard it before. And so it's going to be good. Last two nights, we talked about Dr. Mark Hyman, who's a medical doctor. We read from the book, the 10-Day Detox book. We're not going to read from that book tonight, but we are going to get into some of the influences that I've had that started me. And I just was thinking about it. Tomorrow night, we're going to talk about Dr. Lustig and Dr. Bredesen. Both those guys, they don't know it, but they've influenced me a lot in the things that I know. And especially Dr. Lustig, I've studied him for, I guess it's been 15 years now since I've been studying some of the stuff that Dr. Lustig taught me. So, we take this stuff. The cool thing about my experience is that I'm every day practicing all day long. I started this morning at 7:30. We've been seeing patients all day. I've been in the building working. We've been seeing patients, and now I'm just coming straight on the radio to talk to you. And I hope that it carries over. I hope this stuff that we talk about carries over. But the one thing about it is these doctors that influence me, their influence, number one, pretty much all of them. I guess this is true. I hesitated there for a second because there are lots of doctors that I read and study that influence me that have passed away. That they lived their lives in the 1700s or the 1800s or the early 1900s or whatever. There are some of those guys, the Chapman reflexes and the Bennett reflexes and things that we use with AMIT. Those things are, and the founder, the beginning of AMIT, the muscle work that we do here in the office, kind of came from clinical kinesiology, and that guy has actually passed away. So, and that came from applied kinesiology, and that guy's passed away. So there's some things that there are some of those guys that have passed away, but there are lots of guys that are still functioning and they're still seeing patients and they're still working through this whole thing. And it gives me a lots of different tools in my toolbox. And then I can apply those on a daily basis. And then I can see how they work in my clinic. I can see how they work with my patients. I can see, like Dr. Lustig's stuff. I can talk to my patients, Dr. DeMartini stuff, Dr. Housewright's stuff, all those things. And I can run them through the daily application of clinical work and see how they hold up, or see maybe where I'm falling short in the application of it, or maybe I didn't quite understand their application, or it's obviously exceeding expectations. That's doing well. So it's it's a it's fun to be it's fun to be in the mix. That's what we're doing. We're in the mix every day. So what you're getting from me is stuff that's live. It's real. It's current, and that's what I'm trying to share with you. But I take all this stuff that I learned from these guys and do my best to try to apply it to what we do on a daily basis. So we'll get to those guys tomorrow night. But tonight, I really want to spend the time. I want to spend the time talking about these two doctors, because if there's somebody that really has influenced my way of thinking, these two guys have. There's no question that these two guys have been a major impact on the way that I think about health, the way that I practice health, and it starts with my brother-in-law. So. The story kind of goes back a long ways. And, I've told you guys in the past, I met my wife, Leslie, in the 7th grade. And we went on our first date in the spring of our 10th grade year, a sophomore year. And when we started dating, that was in 1987. Well, Leslie's sister, Lori, was married to a guy named Rick, and he was in chiropractic school. And so Rick grew up in Roswell. His dad was a barber, and for a long, long time had the Wilshire Barbershop in Roswell. And Rick was in chiropractic school. So I didn't know anything about chiropractic. I mean, really, I didn't know anything about health at all, to tell you the honest truth. And I was laughing earlier. I was laughing earlier about with just the last couple that I just adjusted before they left. I was laughing because we were talking about how much we used to think we knew when we were 19, 20 years old. It's like how confident we were, and how, man, I got the world by the tail, and I don't need any help. I got all this. And then I look back now and I think how dumb I must have been. I must have been back then. I didn't know I was that dumb back in the day, but there's no way I had it all figured out, even though I can't remember not having it all figured out. But I'm sure back in the day I didn't know what I was talking about. And I said, when I get to be 75, I'll probably look back to when I'm 53 and think, boy, you thought you had it figured out, but you didn't really. But anyway, so I start dating Leslie, and who's the guy that turned out to be my future brother-in-law, he's in chiropractic school. Well, he graduated chiropractic school. His name's Dr. Rick Housewright, and he graduated chiropractic school in, I believe, 1988. Got his license either somewhere in 1988 or 1989. He might have been like transitioning through the end of 1988. I can't remember exactly when, but and he got his license in one of those 2 years. I think it actually was 1988 when he got his license. And he moved to Lubbock, and he worked for a guy named Howard McElroy for a short period of time. And Howard was an established doctor that was here in Lubbock for a long time. And Rick was kind of he was a study guy. He read lots of books. He was very conscientious. He was very high on chiropractic. He was really a go-getter. He was a very attractive personality kind of individual. And he was kind of an entrepreneur kind of guy. He wasn't one of those guys that was going to stay working for somebody for very long. And he sure didn't. It didn't work out with Dr. McElroy, and Dr. McElroy kind of was very protective of his scope and things. And so anyway, Rick ended up, I think it was about 9 months he was working for him. And then he went off and opened his own practice with the chiropractor that we had both seen from Roswell, a guy named Lloyd Payne. And Lloyd Payne was a piece of work. I'm not gonna go further than that, but they were together for a short period of time. Rick realized that wasn't going to work out, but he was super successful, because back in the 80s, man, it was just crazy. The chiropractic profession was crazy because there was the way insurance worked, and there was a very, very low deductibles. I mean, like $100 deductibles or $200 deductibles, and then it would pay like 90%. And so those chiropractors back in the 80s, man, they made millions of dollars. They just made a lot of money. And Rick was a young guy that had set his practice up with an older guy, and the older guy knew all the tricks of the trade. He knew how to work all the system. He knew how to get involved with attorneys and have all that kind of practice and all that sort of thing like they do. And that didn't last. It really wasn't. You could tell it wasn't going to work for Rick because he had too much integrity to stay in a situation like that. So he ended up leaving and he opened his own practice right here in Lubbock. It's called Lone Star Chiropractic. So this is all happening through the late 80s. And so I come over here in the fall of 90, but I started in 87, 88, 89. So Leslie and I are dating this whole time. And then we transfer over here in the fall of 90, but we started getting exposed to chiropractic, and we started getting exposed to this whole idea of subluxation, and it was a process, and it wasn't just like an overnight thing that all of a sudden I just learned what chiropractic meant. It's not what happened. It really was a 12-year process. And that's part of the reason that I do this show, and it's part of the reason that I spend so much time with my patients on the first day, and it's part of the reason that we try to explain subluxation to people, is because from my own personal experience, it was a 12-year process. So I started this whole thing, and I would go. Leslie was having some sciatic pain, some low back issues, and she started getting adjusted, and it solved that problem, and that went away. But I would go in there, and some days I would go in there and I just have my arms crossed, and I'd just be like, nope, I don't. This is foolish. I like one leg's longer than the other. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, right? Or like, what? How could that possibly do anything? He just put you on your side and twisted you like a pretzel, and like, whatever. Like, I'm not buying that. Like, I look back now, I just think that was when I was 19, 20 years old, right? When I thought I knew everything. I didn't know jack squat about it, how health was. I didn't know anything about health. And and so I'm critiquing what this guy's doing. And what I found out later, probably by Dr. DeMartini, really, but I found out later that people tend to say negative things about things they don't understand. The things that we don't understand, we just tend to see in a negative light. And that's probably because they're unknown to us, and they're firing through our right hemisphere, and our right hemisphere is looking for tigers. But I didn't know that back in the day. So this process kind of kept evolving. Then Rick got off on his own, and he ran a big practice. He had 2 associate doctors with him. He was a popular dude. He ended up traveling around with the NASCAR. He was a race car driver. I remember when he bought his first race car, he used to go out to the dirt tracks here in Lubbock and race his cars. And it was just an attractive life. It was just a really attractive life to watch. And of course, there was lots of money, and it was fun, and they built him a big house, and we'd go out there and cook out and, hang out for the weekend. And they owned 2 lots, and they made a volleyball court out of another lot, brought in some sand and all that sort of thing. Like, it was a lot of fun. We're talking about the early 90s. I'm in college at Tech. Leslie and I are dating. This whole thing is just like rocking. Rick is rocking his practice. He's just got a lot of things going. And then he got hooked up with these guys that were very purpose-driven chiropractors. Like, they were very, what we call in chiropractic, they call it subluxation-based. Like, they were really about the interference in the nervous system and subluxation-based chiropractors, and really, really about this innate intelligence and this whole concept of that you have this spirit inside your body, and the spirit is what runs your body. And they were very, very philosophically sound when it comes to chiropractic. And so it kind of shook Rick's world a little bit, and he kind of transitioned himself out. He had some transition in his office, and he transitioned himself out from being in that, because what he had was the whole X-ray, electric stem, ultrasound, hot pack, cold pack. They had one time they had a hot tub in their office. They were doing lots of therapies, and that was kind of the typical thing back in the day. It was, and a lot of guys still follow that model, but it was an adjustment in 4 modalities is what they call it. And a lot of people, if you've been to a chiropractor, you might have done that. They see, no, well, they put that electric stim on me and a heat pack before they adjust me. The only reason they do that so they can make money. They don't do it philosophically. They're not doing it because they back it up scientifically. They don't do it because they believe in it from a standpoint that that's what you need, because I guarantee you, when they bring their moms into the clinic, or they bring their wives into the clinic, or you come hang out with them on the weekend and they take you up there to the clinic, they don't put you on a heat pack and an electric stim unit for 15 minutes before they adjust you. They would take you in there, put you on the table, and adjust you. But that's not the way you can make money, because it changes the whole ball game when you try. Back in the day, you charged $35 for the adjustment, but you can charge $125 a visit if you add all those other things on there. And that's kind of what Rick was doing. He was making a lot of money and he was doing that, but he never had anybody show him anything different. He just graduated chiropractic school, went to work for Dr. McElroy. That's what Dr. McElroy did. Went to work with Dr. Payne. Dr. Payne was an expert at that. And so he kind of worked his way into the philosophy of chiropractic. But when he finally did, man, he latched onto that stronger as anybody I've ever met. I mean, he really did. He got with those guys. This guy out of Austin, his name is CJ Mertz, and CJ is half awesome as heck and half full of crap. And that's what Dr. DeMartini taught me. But the guys that Rick would train with, they were very, very on purpose, very focused, very really concentrating guys. They were from all over the nation, and there was like 12 of them. They would go meet every 2 months. They'd fly somewhere in the United States to meet. They would train all like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, come back on Sunday type of deal. And they all had very large practices. I'm talking about 700, 1,200, 1,500, 1,800 patient visits a week. And you think, how could you possibly do that? Like, how could you see 1,200 people in 4 days in a week? I mean, that's 300 people a day. Yeah, these guys were seriously rocking it. And a lot of them were just all cash, adjustments, very on purpose, very driven chiropractors. And, at first, when you hear a story like that, you think, well, that there's no possible way that anybody could be getting good care if that's the case. But I can tell you one thing: you can't sustain that kind of practice over a period of time if people don't think that they're getting a value for your care. They won't come back. You wouldn't come back. You wouldn't come back to the office if you didn't feel like you were getting a value for your care. And so that's the one thing that I had to kind of look at and say, man, okay, you might could do this for a year or two, but then you'd run out of people in your town because the word would get around that you're not a good dude. And that's not the case that happened with these guys. Some of these guys are still practicing. It's been 20, 30, it's been 30 something years, 32 years now since 1992. It's been a long time. So Rick got in with these guys. He got very purpose driven. He got very subluxation driven and built himself a big practice here in Lubbock. And I would come in and out, and I would see it, and it was like, whatever, back and forth. But the longer I stayed around it, the more I saw it. And I thought about going to chiropractic school 4 times. 3 times, something was in the way. So there was some sort of obstacle that scared me out of it because I just didn't think I could do it. I tried to stay away from science. I didn't know anything about chiropractic. All I knew was football. All I knew was coaching. That was my life. That was my dad's life. I wasn't ever exposed. I didn't have enough exposure in any sort of long-term experience to be able to feel confident enough to be able to do that. And so what I did is I just went and pursued my coaching career. And so I coached 3 years at New Mexico State. I coached 3 years at Texas Tech. And I was on the staff at Tech. You guys know the story. Coach Dykes retired and I needed a job. And Rick said, why don't you come work for me? Because he was so busy. He was so busy, he needed an office manager. He just needed somebody that would help him run his practice. And so he hired me to do that. And I did a really, really poor job of it, but that's another whole subject. But I got myself into his practice, and I went into his practice, and with this lure, he lured me in there because I told him, I remember telling him, dude, you're the weirdest human being that I've ever met. How's that for your interview? Like you're getting recruited by your future boss, and the first meeting that he says, "Hey, why don't you come work for me?" You tell him you're the weirdest person I've ever met because I didn't know anybody that didn't take a Tylenol when they got a headache. Like I didn't know anybody that didn't vaccinate their kids. I didn't know anybody who wouldn't give their kids a Tylenol when they got a headache. And I used to think he should go to jail for, I used to think that Child Protective Services should come pick up his kids and get his kids away from him because he wouldn't give them a Tylenol when they had a headache. Like it was so shocking to me. It was such a crazy concept to me. I was just like, I don't get it at all. That's cruelty to the kids. So that's where I used to be. Like I and I went to work for him, and he's got that drug, and there's a bucket. He said, when your drugs no longer serve you, please deposit them here. And I told him, I said, Rick, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. When I get a headache, I'm going to take a Tylenol. And when I get an acid reflux, I'm going to take a Rolaids. Acid reflux, I'm going to take a Rolaids. And you can stuff that thing up your nose. It just is, it's so stupid. I just don't get it. And instead of being confrontational, thank goodness he wasn't. Thank goodness he wasn't one of those alpha male kind of guys that just was like, just fire you immediately or chew you out or whatever. Thank goodness he didn't get offended. He was confident enough in his belief that he didn't get offended by those foolish words that came out of my mouth. And so I went to work in his office. And now, for the first time, like this was in March of 2000, and I knew him in 1987. I got my first adjustment in the fall of 1987. So we're talking about all the way, we're talking over 12 years now, 12 and a half years since 1987 to March of 2000, that all of a sudden it's like I'm in the office. And one of the things that he did that was so cool is with all of his new patients, he did what was called a half hour to health class. And he worked from, just like I work today, he worked from 7:30 in the morning till 6 at night, 6:30 at night. And then at 6:30, we would have a half hour to health class that was just titled that. It really wasn't half hour. It never lasted less than an hour probably. And he had a slideshow, and he had his old days, back in, this is March of 2000, so we didn't have all this technology that we had today. He actually had a screen and one of those little slide projectors where he had to actually make slides. And he'd stand there with the little clicker and click the slide and give these people information about health. And I would sit behind the front desk, and I would be working while he was talking to his new patients, and I would just listen to him talk about health. And he would just say, it was just like the same thing every Tuesday. Every Tuesday. Did you know that a dime's weight of pressure, a University of Colorado study said that a dime's weight of pressure on a spinal nerve root can decrease the amount of energy flowing through that nerve by 40%. 25 millimeters of mercury. 25 millimeters of mercury, a dime's weight of pressure on a spinal nerve root can decrease the amount of energy flowing through that nerve by 40%. Did you know that you bleed internally 2 teaspoons every time you take an aspirin? Like he would just make these statements, and he would explain how your body talks to your brain and how your brain talks to your body, and how interference between your brain and your body is called a subluxation. And subluxation causes your body to go into a state of dis-ease or disorder. And now the cells are not functioning properly, and now the cells are creating feedback in this form of symptoms. Your body creates symptoms as a feedback mechanism to let you know that you're in an environment that's incongruent with health. And Rick Housewright's someone that taught me that. Like I learned that in March of 2000. I didn't learn it with the 9 years of college that I had had. I didn't learn it with the 5-year exercise and sports science degree that I got from Texas Tech. I didn't learn it from the 4-year master's degree that I got from Texas Tech. I learned that from Rick Housewright at Lone Star Chiropractic in March of 2000, March, April, somewhere May. Through that every Tuesday night, I listened to that thing, and I used my brain, and I started thinking about that. I started thinking, all right, wait a minute. Like, is this like I actually do bleed internally when I take an aspirin? Like, that doesn't sound great. I don't want to do that. No one told me that before. There's actually a dime's weight of pressure. How much is that? Like, not very much, right? Like, it doesn't take very much pressure to decrease the amount of energy flowing through your nervous system. And then I started seeing the patients get better. And when we get back from the break, we're going to take a break right now on the radio, but when we get back from the break, I'll tell you the life-changing experience I had. And so you guys stick with us. We'll be right back right after these messages. Yeah, all you social media people, if you're just now showing up, we're talking about doctors who influence me. And I'm going back this week and just kind of talking about some of these guys, and it may take me 2 weeks because there's a bunch of them out there. But we're talking about my brother-in-law, and we're talking about Dr. John DeMartini of the two guys that really, really had an impact on the way that I think. And listening to those half-hour to health classes, man, it wasn't the first one, it wasn't the second one, because the first one you kind of listen to him talk, and you're like, oh, he's full of crap, he's just talking. And then the second one, you like listen to him, and you're like, what is he saying? Like, I should probably pay attention to this. And then, in between those half-hour health classes, what you're getting is you're watching the patients. So you watch the patient come into the office, and you were like, I was running the front desk. So I knew how the patient was on their first day. I'm the one that was there when they took their new patient paperwork. I'm the one that was there when they limped in there, or they couldn't sit in the chair properly, or they just were miserable, or whatever their problem was that brought them into the office. And so they weren't faking that. They weren't making that up. They didn't know Rick before that day. A lot of them would come in. That's the first time that he had met him. They heard about him on the radio, or they heard about him in racing his car, or they heard about him from somebody else. They referred him to the office, just like I had with my new patient today. And like, she got referred from the lady that works with her. And she's an RN for 50-something years, 40-something years. She's an RN and lived a life in healthcare. And I told her stuff today she'd never heard before in her life. All right, hang on. Let me get us back on the radio. Okay, everybody, we're back. This is Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, and we are talking about doctors who influence me. And we're talking about my brother-in-law, who is named Dr. Rick Housewright. And part of the reason I wanted to do this tonight, too, is because Rick he's on the last, I mentioned it in the intro, but he's in the last days of his life. He's 60 years old, and last fall, he got diagnosed with a glioblastoma brain tumor, and it's inoperable. They operated once, they can't do anything about it, and he literally is within hours probably of death and passing on. And so I just wanted to share this because he was a huge influence in my life, because I would listen to these half-hour to health classes. And so finally, after several of those classes, and watching the people come into the office, watching them go through the treatments. And what was the treatments? The treatment was the chiropractic adjustment. He didn't do heat. He didn't do electric stim. He didn't do ultrasound. He didn't do therapeutic exercises. He did adjustments and cervical tractioning, and that's it. That's the only thing he would do. He had one intersegmental traction table, which is a roller table, but most of the people never got on the roller table. It just was. It was just adjustments. It was structural adjustments to get the cervical curve and get the structure back to where it was supposed to be, to relieve the subluxation, to detect and address the subluxation. That was his mission, to detect and address the subluxation, because the belief system is that the human being is a self-healing organism, that you have an innate intelligence, and that innate intelligence knows exactly how to run your body. And that if you interfere with innate intelligence, your body will lose its way. And so we don't have to fix a patient. We don't, it's the wrong terminology. It's just figure out where they're subluxated, adjust them, move them back into a position to where their body and their brain can communicate and get out of the way. Let them heal themselves. And I was watching it. I was watching those patients come in, and I was watching them get better. And then I was listening to this half hour to health class, and I was just like, dude, I get it. Like, so after one of those classes, I said, Rick, what are you saying? What are you saying to me? That there's a nerve that goes from my brain to my heart? And he was like, yep. And I said, you're telling me that if I get a dime's weight of pressure on the nerve that goes from my brain to my heart, that my heart might not function properly? And he said, yep. And I was like, okay, I don't really know what's quackery about that. I don't know what's alternative about that. I don't know what's complementary and alternative medicine about that. I don't know what's holistic about that. All of those terms to me, that's my foundation of saying that those terms are just made up by people who try to put us in a box. The alternative people, your alternative medicine. Bull crap. Your body works like your brain communicates with your body communicates with your brain. If you have interference between your brain and your body's not going to communicate properly. It's going to go into a state of disorder and dis-ease, and it's going to create some sort of symptom. And the symptom is not the reason of the symptom is not because of the lack of pharmaceutical in the bloodstream. I do not get a headache because of the lack of Tylenol in my bloodstream. That's what he taught me. I'm telling you, life-changing. So that night when he said, I said, are you telling me that if I have a nerve that goes from my brain to my heart, which I didn't even know that. I didn't even realize. I thought your heart was your cardiovascular system. I thought your heart pumped your blood and got oxygen to your tissues. What does your brain have to do with that? And that's how ignorant I was about health and wellness. At 29 years old and a master's degree and an exercise sports science bachelor's degree, I didn't have a single clue about health back then. Drank Cokes, ate sugar, drank milk, tortillas, all of it. The whole thing. Exercise was hit and miss, didn't sleep, just like a standard American human being. I was like everybody else that I knew. And then all of a sudden, that night, I said, it just clicked. It was like a light bulb just went on that night. It was after the half hour to health class on a Tuesday in his office. And it was like, dude, you're telling me that interference, this one dime's weight of pressure might not make my heart function properly. And he said, yes. And the light bulb went on. And that was 12 and a half years after my first adjustment. It was 12 and a half years of going out to dinner, coming back to the office and getting an adjustment. It was 12 and a half years of standing there with my arms folded thinking that this dude is more full of crap than anybody I've ever seen. It was 12 and a half years of saying that he should take his children away and Child Protective Services should take his children away because he wouldn't give them a Tylenol when they got a headache. And then all of a sudden, it was like the field of dreams. It was the field of dreams moment when the little girl falls off of the bleachers, and the brother-in-law who's trying to tell Ray he's got to sell the farm, Ray. And then all of a sudden, here comes old Doc, comes out there, saves the little girl. She's choking on the hot dog. And then all of a sudden, the brother-in-law is like, where'd all these people come from? It was just like, in one moment, I understood chiropractic. In one moment, I was just like, bam. I mean, it's going to make me cry just thinking about how emotional that is. Because it's like, oh my gosh, like, what a gift. Like, what a gift to have that moment where you finally understand. It's like I'm a self-healing organism. Like during that time in his office, I was in a wheelchair because my feet were flared up because I had strained my back working on files, and I went and got a massage, and I got neuroma in my feet where I couldn't even stand up. Like it was like someone had drilled a railroad spike through my feet. During that period of time, I was so inflamed that I would get adjusted and my rib cage would go into spasm because I had so much inflammation in my body. I remember the first time I did my omega 6-3 test. It was 33-1, and I just got one back. I couldn't get exactly the number, but I know it's somewhere around 2 to 3-1. It's less than 3-1. Somewhere in that 2-1 range is where my omega 6-3 ratio is right now. And it went from 33-1 to 2-1. And when I was at 33-1, I was so inflamed that sometimes I'd get adjusted and go into a complete spasm. And I just know the difference. I just know the difference. And it's not going to make any difference. It doesn't make any difference, the criticism. It doesn't make any difference who the critic is at this point. It's not, you're not going to shake me off that tree. Like I get it now. I get it. And I've seen it over 100,000 times with my hands. I've adjusted over 100,000 people with my hands, and I know now. I know that there's a healing spirit in the body, and I know that if you put that body in an environment that's congruent with health, that you will express health. And that's what happened that night. And it wasn't long after that, we were at a seminar. That next spring, we were at a seminar in Dallas. And we went to listen to Dr. John Demartini, who Rick had spent a lot of time with. He was a chiropractor from Houston, and he is the craziest dude I've ever met. And John traveled. He lived on that ship that travels around the world. And he's like one of the most dynamic, studied, electric, outgoing dudes I've ever listened to. He just blows my mind every time I listen to him. And I went to listen to John Demartini speak. And after we were done that morning, before that we went there, I was in the shower, and I just remember thinking to myself, I could do this. Like the fourth time, right? The three other times there was some sort of fear, there was some sort of obstacle. It wasn't the right timing. But this fourth time, I remember saying that to myself. And so after we went and listened to Dr. John Demartini talk, Rick went up to say hi to him, and he said, come on, I want to introduce you to Dr. Demartini. Because he'd spent lots of time with him, gone to his seminars, been to his whole breakthrough experience and all that sort of thing. And he introduced me, and he said, here, this is my brother-in-law. He's a future chiropractor. And I just remember I turned at Rick, and I looked at Rick, and I was like, what are you talking about? I just thought to myself, why'd you say that? And Dr. Demartini said, well, it's nice to meet you. You might as well, if it's already written, you should just get after it. What are you waiting on? Type of deal. And so that was the pivotal moment right there. And that was in the spring of 2001. So I worked from March of 2000. This is probably sometime February, maybe February, March of 2001. And that was the changing moment. And I was 30 years old. And I thought to myself, I'm like, all right, like it's time to go. And I start to, how we do, we try to rationalize it out. And I'm like, all right, what am I going to do? Am I going to be am I going to be a chiropractor? What if I don't do that? What will I be in 5 years? By the time I'm 35, what will I be? And I'm like, I have no idea. And I thought, but if I go to chiropractic school, by the time I'm 35, what will I be? Well, I'll be a doctor of chiropractic. And so I went, we were coming back from that trip in Dallas, and Leslie and I were talking about nutrition for our kids. And all of a sudden we had one of those moments where people talk about where like God was in the van with us. Like you heard God speak to you. And I always thought that was one of those I thought, man, I appreciate their passion, but that's not real. Like that doesn't happen. But we just had a moment, and I looked at her and I said, "Did you get that?" And she was like, "Yep." I didn't say anything. It was the same thing like Field of Dreams, like Ease is Pain, right? Where they're at the ball game and with James Earl Jones and Kevin Costner, and they see it on the deal, and then they did get it, but they didn't. It was exactly the same kind of moment. It was just like, "Did you get that?" And Leslie's like, "Yep." And I said, "It's time to go to chiropractic school." And she's like, "Yep." And so then we started. It was right there, and we went in May. And all of a sudden, all those obstacles that I thought were obstacles, they just started to dissolve right in front of me. And started my prerequisites. I had to get 30 hours between May and the end of the year. I had to get 30 hours. So I went to Northlake Junior College and started taking science classes, took them all summer, took them in the fall, had to take one class in the winter between the two semesters, and then started chiropractic school in 2002. And then I started listening and studying more, and Rick would give me tapes. He would give me CDs and a whole CD packet of Dr. John Demartini. And he would share with me the things that Dr. Demartini would talk about. And it was really funny because I actually, one of my guys that came in tonight, my very last adjustment was one of those guys that, and he said something to me, and he said something about life is balanced. But Dr. Demartini would present things, and I'll just read it. This is from the Breakthrough Experience. This is one of his programs that he puts on, and this is something that he did when I was in school. And this is the magnificent intelligence within the human body. And I just want you to listen to this paragraph right here, and just understand the magnificence of your body. And he's just talking about amino acids. If the 20 amino acids used to construct enzymes are selected at random and arranged in a random order, what would be the chance of obtaining an actual bacterial enzyme with 200 amino acids? The answer is obtained by multiplying the probability for each correct amino acid in the sequence, 1 in 20, together 200 times, yielding 1 in 20 to the 200th. A vastly low probability. So what is he saying? That in order to get an actual bacterial enzyme with 200 amino acids, because there's 20 amino acids, and they have to line up in a specific sequence. Those 20 amino acids have to line up in a specific sequence, 200 amino acids long, in order to obtain an actual bacterial enzyme, and it ends up being 1 in 20 to the 200th. Do the math on that. A vastly low probability. But since more than one amino acid sequence might be able to function to catalyze a given reaction, the author concedes a probability in 1 in 10 to the 20. But now, the coup de grace. To duplicate a bacterium, it would not suffice to create a single enzyme. The odds against this would be 1 in 10 to the 20 to the 2,000, or 1 in 10 to the 40,000th. That's the probability. 1 in 10 to the 40,000th. These exponential notations are easy to state but difficult to take it to heart. The total number of hydrogen atoms in the universe is something like 10 to the 60th. So 10 to the 40,000 is unthinkably improbable. If the total number of trials for life to get going is only 10 to the 51st, and the chances are 1 in 10 to 40,000, the life just could not have occurred. Hoyle and some other guy gave up on spontaneous generation since the likelihood of the event was comparable to the chances that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the material within. This is the kind of stuff that I would get from Dr. DeMartini. And I know that that's complicated to talk about. The chances that you're random, the chances that 20 amino acids lined up in a sequence 200 long to make multiple enzymes is 1 times 10 to the 40 thousandths. 1 times 10 to the 40 thousandths. There's no chance that you're random. There has to be an order. There has to be a intelligence that is so dynamic and so large and so amazing that there's just, it doesn't even make logical sense to argue against it. And that intelligence that's so large gives us a piece of itself to run our bodies called innate intelligence. And those are the things. This is something on the heart. The heart works without interruption for 70 to 80 years, without care or cleaning, without repair or replacement. Over a period of 70 years, it beats 100,000 times a day, approximately 40 million times per year, nearly 3 billion pulsations all told. It pumps 2 gallons of blood per minute, well over 100 gallons per hour, through a vascular system about 60,000 miles in length, over 2 times the circumference of the earth. There's a lot of stuff, man. It's a lot of stuff. I mean, we could just go on. We could go on about DNA. We could talk about the origins of life and DNA and all that stuff. And so I just started listening. I started listening to Dr. DeMartini, and he started teaching me about balance. And he showed me the sine wave. And he showed me, for you guys on the radio, you're just going to have to bear with us on this one because I got to draw some of this stuff out. But he showed me this idea of balance, and he talked about it from a sine wave, and he would just draw a sine wave, and he would just take it and he would just say, all right, this is a sine wave, and we consider the top to be positive, and we consider the bottom to be negative. But he talked about this little piece that's right here in the middle in quantum physics called the Higgs boson, which is the God particle, which is neither positive nor negative. It just is. It's just balanced. It's right in the middle. And amplitude is the distance from the middle up and from the middle down. And in a sine wave, those are equal. The amplitude is equal. And he explained that life is balanced, that half of your day, you are the light of the world. You're balanced. You're moving through a sine wave. And every once in a while, depending on your amplitude, you will hit a moment in time where it's neither positive nor negative. It's the God particle. It just is. It's neutral. It's just. And what he called that point right there is love. That's the place we're all trying to get to. And it just depends on the amplitude as to how many seconds, how many moments in your day you spend. So if your amplitude is very low, then your sine wave goes like that. That's not drawn properly. But now what you have in your day is you have multiple moments of being on that particle where the love is. And that's what we're trying to get to. We're just trying to get to love. That's what we're all trying to get to. We just want to be loved. And there's a positive and there's a negative to our day. And it's not either or, it's and it's simultaneously functioning, and it's always. And that's the balance of the universe. That's the things that Dr. DeMartini started telling me. Now, if you've never heard that before, and this is the first time you've ever seen it, you're probably going to say something negative or that didn't make any sense or whatever, right? Okay, I get it. I was the same way too. But just absorb it for a minute. Just take it in and just realize half the people love you and half the people hate you. Half of your day sucked and half of your day was awesome. Now, how are you going to perceive it? Are you going to go up there on the top of that sine wave and think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread? Are you going to go up there, just pat your chest, just talk about how awesome you are today? Because you know what's going to happen? You're just going to retract the bottom of that sine wave. If I think I'm awesome and I'm the greatest thing ever, I'll go home and Leslie will tell me what a sucky husband I am. If I'm down in the dumps and I don't feel very good and I'm not doing very well, someone's going to come along and say, hey, doc, you doing okay today? And try to pick me up and bring me back up. Leslie would do the same thing. If I went home feeling all down in the dumps, she'd bring me back up. Our life is balanced. Half your day was awesome. Half your day sucked. Happened simultaneously. Not what we tend to do is we look at half of it. We just look at half of the picture. We just want to look at just the negative half, and then we don't really want to recognize that the other half of our day was awesome. And that's just one of the things that Dr. DeMartini taught me. He also asked me the question, what happens when you cut a magnet in half? If you have a magnet and the magnet has a positive and a negative pole, and you cut the magnet in half, what do you get? You get two magnets. And inside those magnets, you have a positive and a negative and a positive and a negative. And what happens if you cut that magnet in half? You get two magnets. And it goes the same way, positive and negative, positive and a negative. And if you keep cutting that magnet in half, what you will find out is that there will eventually come a point where you can't cut it. You've cut it so thin that you can't cut it anymore in half. And what you find out is that the positive and the negatives are right next to each other, and they always are. That's the balance of the universe. That's the balance of life. Only half your life sucks. If you just want to focus on the sucky part of your life, you can do that, but you don't get fulfillment. And if you just want to focus on the positive part of your life, you can do that too, but that's not real. The power of positive thinking to me is hogwash. I never have bought into that. Not since I've seen this. I might have done it beforehand, but after that, it's like the power of positive thinking only just ignores the negative, and there's a negative to the other side. You can't ignore it. You have to acknowledge it in a state of love. What is in the middle? The middle is the love, and that's what we're trying to get to. That's what we're trying to accomplish. That's what we really want deep down inside, is we just want to be loved. And we grow at the border of support and challenge. We grow we right at the border of support and challenge. If we have too much support, we become fat and lazy. If we have too much challenge, we become resentful. But if we have just enough of both, it helps us grow and move forward. And I've applied these things in the practice of my life, and the practice of, sometimes I've done it with maturity and sometimes I've done it with immaturity. But those two things right there are things that just have been massive influences on me. The innate intelligence, the subluxation, the power that made the body heals the body. All those things that I learned in listening to Dr. Housewright and Dr. DeMartini they've just been invaluable. They actually have. They've just been invaluable. I appreciate both of those guys so much for their influence. I hope you guys got something out of that. And I hope you'll come back tomorrow night at 6. We'll talk about Robert Lustig and Dr. Dale Bredesen and the influence that they've had on my life too. So you guys have a great night. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.